Welcome again, Joram. In the last episode, we ended up with you having two images of Islam. One as reflected by sources, by non-Muslims writing about Islam, and the other is an image reflected by Islamic genuine sources. And this was the advice given to you by Abdul Hakim Murad. Jazakallah khairan. Now, before we proceed, I want to ask you about this anti-Islam position you adopted, and you seem to have adopted from young age. Was this a family position? Your entire family was like this, or just yourself?
No, not the entire family. Well, a lot of people in the family were a bit anti-Islam, the light version, so to say, but not like me. I was very extreme in that sense. But it had to do with the fact that like I told in the last episode, one of the fathers of one of my best friends back then, when I was younger, he was a minister and he was pretty anti-Islam. And I read a lot of books.
He had an impact on you?
Yeah, he had an impact on me, but also the books that he read, I read. So I saw, okay, he's true, he's right. And but a lot of people in my family didn't like the fact that I was joining the far right in that sense, because they were more into the Christian political parties. And my grandfather, for example, told me, why don't you join the SGP? And the SGP is the most Christian organization in the Netherlands, because he said, well, this guy from your party, the Freedom Party, he's like a screaming market guy. So he said, it's not, he's a salesman. But no, this so because when I compared it also to my brothers and my sister, for example, first of all, they weren't into politics like me, but they weren't anti-Islam like me as well. So I was, in a way, of course, you're shaped by your environment, and like I said, the books and the tradition, but it hit me a lot harder because I dove into it.
And I think luckily in your case, you were quite academic in your research. You wanted to really find out exactly what was going on.
Yeah, but it had to do with nafs as well, because because I didn't want to be embarrassed if I made a mistake. So I thought it has to be right. I cannot afford myself to make a mistake.
You don't want people to come after you and say,
yeah, say, look at him, he doesn't know. So I had to know, I have to have the sources that are correct. So I was obsessed of being right. And of course, it's also, I had my doubts about the Christian tradition. And of course, I was really practicing Christian, especially in the heart. I really believed what I believed. But of course, if you start doubting it, you want to be on the right track. You're searching for the truth with a capital T. So in that sense as well, I wanted to be correct, because I was writing about religion. And religion, of course, it's not just like writing about vegetables or football or whatever.
So how did you reconcile these seemingly contradictory positions?
Yeah, well, I thought to myself, of course, perhaps those Muslim guys have this point about Tawhid, and they're correct. That could be. But of course, they have this last prophet, this man who was wrote about in the books I read as an evil person, as a thug in a sense. So that's it. But of course, I wrote with Abdul Hakim Murad, and one of the articles he advised me to read that was pointing to a book, and this book was written by a guy called Martin Links. And it's a green book about the life of the Prophet. Peace and blessings.
I think one of the best English
really.
Of course, biographies of the Prophet.
Yeah, and of course I read a lot of books now about the life of the Prophet, the biographies, but this is still my favorite. And because I started reading it, and he of course was a Muslim, so I started reading it from an Islamic perspective, and I saw this whole other character. I saw him as a father, and I saw him as a husband, and I saw him as a general, and I saw him as a teacher and a statesman. So the idea I had of this evil, very scary person, it disappeared when I was really reading about his life and the stories from the Islamic sources. And I'm talking about Hadith and Quran and other stories that showed me another person. And I thought to myself, that's almost impossible that those people are talking about the same man.
And you cannot but love him.
Yeah, so, and that was my problem. problem. So that was what happened, was that I was reading a story about Hind. And the story about Hind, of course, Abu Sufyan. And she paid, in a way, someone to kill the favorite uncle of the Prophet.
Hamza.
Yeah, Hamza. And he was killed, and after he was killed, he was mutilated. They cut off his ears and nose, and they were parading with his body parts. And
she chewed his liver.
Yeah, and it was really sick. It's really barbaric to read about it, and of course, especially when people done stuff like that. So I thought, this is a very harsh act. It's very extreme. But of course, I was reading the book, and in one part, it's Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, becomes he gets power. He becomes the guy who rules Mecca.
The head of state.
Head of state. And then Hind is there again. And then I thought, okay, where's the part that he chops off her head or she get burnt or whatever?
Retribution.
Yeah, of course. He wants to take revenge. That was the normal human response, I think, in a way. And he said, well, I cannot look at her in that way, face to face, but everybody here is forgiven. So we start all over again. There is no bloodshed anymore. This is a reset in a way. And I thought to myself, well, that's almost remarkable. That is remarkable. It's almost unbelievable that you
most civilized ever.
That you are able to forgive a person that did something horrific to you, and if it was not just someone in the neighborhood who was guilty, and of course there was bad and nasty as well. But this was his favorite uncle, and then still he said she is forgiven, and she becomes Muslim in the end. So. That was, for me, there was like the switch.
Subhanallah.
And I thought, well, okay, this is not an evil man. That's just not true. And of course, I don't know if he was a prophet, but he was not an evil man.
Now you have a responsibility now.
Yeah.
Now you've known, then you have to follow.
Yeah, and then of course, and then I started reading more because I was very interested. And Mahatma Gandhi once said that he was interested in, that he felt sorry that he could not read more about the Prophet after he finished the books about his life. And I had, in a way, the same feeling when I finished the book of Martin Links. And I didn't know, of course, are there a lot more books about his life? What books can I read? So I started reading all these books about his life. And it really changed my perspective of Islam, because in the end I learned, and in the beginning I didn't know that, of course, that they said, well, he was the Quran. His life, the life of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he was the Quran, the living Quran in a way.
They describe him as a Quran walking on the earth.
Yeah. So, but of course, I thought this was the Quran. In the beginning, I saw the Quran as a license to kill. And I saw him as an evil man. And all of a sudden, of course, this whole concept of the Quran changes because of me knowing his character, because I saw who he was and what he did and what he taught to the people and what his message was. And that changed everything. And in the end, I was still writing my book. My book began, of course, as an anti-Islam book. Then it became a search for God and truth, and it ended up me becoming a Muslim.
This is the book, right?
Yeah, this is the book. And at one time, of course, I realized that, okay...
What a title.
Apostate, yeah. Well, I was an apostate from Christianity and from my old belief system and the far right. But in the end, I realized, of course, well, I accepted this oneness of God, this Tawheed concept. And I had no arguments to say that Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was no prophet. So I accepted him as a prophet. But that, in a way, is shahada, of course, because you say those two things. And I didn't say it, but I thought it. And I said, okay, I'm moving in the wrong direction, in a way. So, because I didn't want to be a Muslim. And even after what I read, and even after what I knew, I didn't want to be a Muslim. Of course, it had to do with my ego as well. But also because...
Well, it's not an easy decision.
No, really, because...
Someone who grew up in a observant Christian family.
Yeah, and of course, because I was active in an anti-Islamic movement.
True.
So the combination made it...
It would be very embarrassing.
Yeah, and it was, of course, in a sense, embarrassing. First of all, for myself, and then, of course, people around me, family, and then the bigger society and everybody who knew me, old colleagues, people from television, etc. Everybody said, he went crazy. But to refer back to the moment that I was finishing the book, and I thought, okay, I just leave it for what it is. I shut down, I don't do anything anymore after I realized that I was thinking about Shahada. And I put everything aside, and one of the books that fell off the shelf after I put them there was the Quran. And when I picked it up, and it sounds a little bit like a fairy tale, but it really happened. So when the book fell, I picked it up, and my finger or my thumb was on a page, and I thought it was Surah 22, Ayat 46, and forgive me if I'm mistaken, but it says, and it's a translation, of course, it's not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts. And when I saw that, then I realized that that's my personal problem, because I wrote it down. I could see what I wrote down. Nobody forced me to read anything. Nobody forced me to write anything. I did it on my own. And I did it because I was interested and I wanted to refute Islam. So there was nobody who said, oh, yeah, you're doing this because of this. So I saw it, and then I thought, yeah, that is what it is. My eyes can see, but my heart is not able to accept it. So my heart is closed. And then I thought to myself, well, if there is a God that is really actively involved in our lives and is here, then I want to follow the right path. And of course, I was a Christian officially back then still. And I made a dua, and it wasn't, of course, a dua because.
Well, actually, you were in a no man's land.
I was in a no man's land. I was a God seeker, so to say.
Yes.
So. And I said, oh Lord, if there is a right direction, point it to me, or put me on the right track. And of course, there were no glittery or shining stars falling down and stuff like that. It was just that. It was my little prayer. And I went to bed. But the next morning, when I woke up, I was very calm. I felt very secure and very strong. And I thought to myself, well, if that really is what I believe, then I have to become Muslim. And that's what I did.
That's Hidayah.
Yeah,
that's Hidayah, guidance.
Inshallah.
Oh, subhanallah.
Yeah. And that there was the story of me becoming Muslim related to the book.
No, what was the impact on your family?
Well, a part really didn't like it, and I didn't told everybody because I would never.
But initially, but now everybody knows.
Yeah, but I didn't want to be a Muslim. So in the beginning, of course, I asked my mother and my brother and the near family, the core family, so to say, to read the book and to read the stuff that I already had written before it became a book. So I tried to take everybody with me on my journey in a way. After I said, well, I'm doubting stuff. So in the middle of the book, I start sharing my journey in a way. But a lot of people didn't read it, I realized later on. And some aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews and so that I didn't tell them, of course, because I didn't see them too often. So for them it was really shocked. Is it true? Is it a joke or something? Yeah, some
from
friends,
a very anti-Muslim position
to become a Muslim. Yeah, and of course it was on TV as well and on internet. And there was this. I worked back then for a very Christian organization after I left politics. In 2017, and I didn't finish the book yet, so I was still in my in-between phase. But I was working for an organization called the AO, the Evangelical Broadcasting Organization of the Netherlands. It's the most Christian organization on TV and radio. And I had to tell them as well, of course. So I told the boss in a way, well, I became Muslim. I said, what?
What are you talking about?
And he said, oh, why? And I couldn't talk. And he said, what happened? And so I tried to explain him bit by bit. He said, I can't believe it. And because I was the spokesperson on the radio.
And now your position with them becomes untenable.
Yeah, of course. And I was the guy who spoke for the conservative Christians on the radio. So I always had a harsh statement. So, and all of a sudden, and he said, oh, that's something we have to stop, of course, because I'm not a Christian anymore. And I cannot talk for conservative Christians on a Christian radio station if I'm a Muslim. That doesn't make any sense. So, and he said, well, yeah, but you have to explain it to the people who follows you on the radio. Our organization all of a sudden is this Muslim guy here. So we made a little documentary about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so
Upon his advice?
yeah, and we were talking about it because I said, well, there will be a book, and perhaps you can show people the book then. And he said, well, perhaps we can do it in a documentary. We can talk. We have like an interview setting.
Wow.
So that was,
Well, it's very good of him, really, to...
yeah. So it was very nice, and he was a very friendly person. He still is, by the way. But of course, he was shocked. But we did. So
I would be.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of shocked myself. So that was we work. Of course, my mother, she cried when I told her. She really didn't like it, of course. Yeah.
Were you married, or were you?
Yeah, I was married, and so I had to tell my wife. And she was very she was very supportive, very sweet. And she said, well, if that's really what's in your heart, and that's really what you believe, and you're still the husband that you always been, and you're still nice and sweet for the children, there's no problem here. So that was very nice. And yeah, well, of course, she's from a Christian background, so that's okay. And that's and we were still happily married, and that goes.
She's still Christian.
She's still Christian, yeah, but you never know. That's what happened to the wife. The children were very small, so there was no issue. I couldn't really.
What about the political establishment?
Yeah, there was another.
Because you were part of it.
Yeah, and well, a lot of people were also in shock. They really said, and it was very funny because they asked Geert Wilders on television. He heard it when he was in a show. So he was walking through to the parliament when he was in a show, and then he heard it. So people said, Joram, you became a Muslim. What happened? What do you think? And he said, yeah, it's unbelievable. I cannot. It's crazy. And then he said, it's like, and I had to laugh about it, but he said it's like a vegetarian going to work in a slaughterhouse. And it was a very populist one-liner again, of course. But anyway,
he's an expert in that.
Yeah, and of course it was. I thought it was kind of funny. Of course, it's nonsense, but that was the whole party. Yeah, so a lot of people were in shock. A lot of people didn't like it. Of course, after that, you get a lot of death threats, and people say, "Well,
really?
we'll kill you, we'll rape your wife," and the most horrible, crazy stuff. Most of the time, it's of course it's nothing. But you never know, because sometimes there's just one crazy person, and you have a real problem. So, but that's part of the deal.
Now, how about your political career then?
Well, I left politics after 2017. We had a little organization because I left the Freedom Party. I was, like, say, an independent, and I didn't want to go on with a new party in that way. So we asked someone else to become a leader of this new party, and I was going to the background, and I wanted to work for the scientific organization that was related to this political party. So that's what I did. I've been working there for now, I thought a year and a half after that, and then I was working, of course, for this Christian organization. But then again, everything changed, and I had to do something else, and I left politics. But I wanted to do something to, it sounds a little crazy, but to make up, of course, because people say, well, in a religious sense, you start all over again, right? You're a Muslim now, so clean sheet.
Newly born.
Yeah, newly born, yeah. So I thought, and that's very nice, and I'm very happy about that, of course. But in a social and political way, everything is still there, of course. All the things that I said, all the arguments I wrote for the Freedom Party are still there. Sometimes I even hear them saying things that I made up back then. So the problem is still there. So I thought to myself, well, I have to do something to counter this narrative. And then with a couple of friends, we founded an organization. It's called Islam Experience Center. And what we do is that we go around schools, parts even from government, departments of government. We go to churches, we go to mosques, we go to every institution that asks us if we want to come by. And we do it with virtual reality. So we made virtual reality movies, and we have this box, and every time we come, we show people the inside perspective of Islam. What do we believe of Islam? And we did it a little bit with the context of my personal story. So when you next time I'll bring it. When you're looking at the movie, you're in your chair, and you're watching television, you see the Twin Towers, and you see Theo van Gogh, the guy who was murdered in the Netherlands, and you see all these horrible negative images of Islam and Muslims, and you hear people talking about Muslim. So it's very anti-Islam, the setting, and then all of a sudden someone knocks at the door, and you stand up, and you really are somewhere else. So it's a 360 experience. So everywhere you look, you really are in a different place. And then you go to the door, and all of a sudden you're in the year 850 in Baghdad, and in the House of Wisdom. And there's this old man, he says, "Salam alaikum, welcome, I was expecting you." And he's like a guide, and he starts explaining what is Islam, what's the Qibla, what's the Quran, who is the Prophet, etc., all these things. He shows you a map of the golden age of Islam, that it stretched from Spain to China, and everything within between.
And this is shown on a screen, or how do
no,
people see
it's on glasses. So you put on the glasses. It's called VR, virtual reality.
So you take the equipment with you to schools?
It's like a box, and we bring it, and we give, for example, 25 students. We all give them these glasses, and we play this movie, but it's a personal movie, so they see it on their own glasses. So, and if they look around or up or whatever, so they really are in, for example, the House of Wisdom back then. And after that, the next scene is that he says, "Well, I'll bring you to another place," and then you're in Mecca, and not Mecca of nowadays with the golden buildings and all the fancy stuff.
Mecca of the old days.
Old days. So you just see sand, you see a market, you see some palm
Beautiful
trees.
Mecca.
Yeah. And you see some people, and you see the Kaaba, of course. And there's this guide says, "Well, let's listen." And there's this guy, and you see Bilal. And you don't really see him, but he's in the shadow. And he says, "That's Bilal." And you see some Sahaba sitting with him. And he's explaining some parts of the Quran to them. He's talking about the Quran. And that, of course, you hear that, so you get this part of the Quran as a message. And then he says, "Well, it's not about, and it's not only this story of the Sahaba and the story of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, but it's also a whole civilization that came with it." And he says, "Well, I'll take you to the last scene." And then it's getting blurry and dark, and then all of a sudden you're in the middle of the desert. And it's an extreme big desert, so when you look around, you're the only person in the, let's say, hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. And then you see all these stars and a very big moon.
This reminds me of Muhammad Asad's The Road to Mecca.
Yeah. Yeah, really. And then he starts explaining about inventions from the golden age of Islam, like the 1001 inventions. Yeah. So he says, "Well, we have the wings of airplanes, and algebra, and universities, and coffee, and hospitals." And you see these things as holograms in the sky. So you see floom, 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 camera, and you see all these things.
How long did it take to produce? It's fascinating.
The producer, it was long, because we had to write the script, and we had to have this company writing it and making it. So it took about, I think, 8 months.
Costly too?
It was this, and it only takes 7 minutes. It was 80,000 euro for 7 minutes. So it's pretty expensive.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, and in the end, you hear the adhan, I have to say, sorry.
Adhan,
yeah, you hear the adhan. And then you wake up in your chair again. So you're back in your living room with your television. Your television became snow or black, and your eyes are opening, and it says Islam Experience Center. And then the old man is on a picture, and he says, "Don't forget what you've heard, don't forget what you've seen." And then it's over. So that's what we do now.
Joram, it's fascinating discussion with you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time you spared for us today.
Yeah, well, likewise, it was a great honor.
Thank you very much. Thank you.